I stood there holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, watching my son lean close to his wife at his own birthday party, and heard 5 words that changed everything. She doesn't matter. We only invite her out of obligation. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 72 years old. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let me know what state or country you're in. I love connecting with all of you beautiful souls out there. Now let me tell you about the night I became invisible to my own family and how I made sure they'd never forget me again. The party was at John's house, my eldest son. He'd just turned 45, and his wife Jessica had gone all out with the decorations. White and gold balloons everywhere, a catered buffet that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, and at least 60 guests I'd never met. Business associates, Jessica's book club friends, neighbors from their gated community in Scottsdale. I'd driven myself there, 40 minutes from my modest ranch house in Mesa. The invitation had come by text, not even a phone call, just a group message that said, "Birthday celebration for John, Saturday at 7, casual, elegant attire." Casual, elegant. I'd worn my best navy dress, the one I'd bought for my granddaughter's college graduation 3 years ago. I'd even gone to the salon that morning, spent $50 I didn't really have to spare on getting my silver hair styled nicely. When I arrived, Jessica opened the door with that smile. You know the one I mean. The smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Oh, Eleanor, you made it." Like she was surprised, like maybe she'd been hoping I wouldn't show up. John was on the patio, surrounded by men in expensive polo shirts, all of them laughing at something on someone's phone. He saw me, gave a little wave, mouthed, "Hi, Mom," and turned right back to his conversation. That should have been my first clue. My younger son, David, wasn't even there. He lived in California now, and according to John, he was too busy with work to fly in for a weekend party. We used to be close, David and I. We used to talk on the phone every Sunday. Now I was lucky if I got a text on my birthday. I made my way through the crowd trying to find a familiar face. There was John's daughter, Zoe, my granddaughter, but she was glued to her phone in the corner, barely looked up when I said hello. She's 23 now, works in marketing, and apparently I'm not interesting enough to pull her away from Instagram for 5 minutes. I tried to join conversations, but I kept finding myself on the outside. A group of women were talking about a yoga retreat in Sedona. I opened my mouth to mention I'd been to Sedona last spring, but they'd already moved on to discussing someone's kitchen renovation. A cluster of men near the bar were debating golf courses. I don't golf. Never had time to learn. I watched Jessica float through the party, her hand constantly on John's arm, laughing at jokes, introducing people to each other. She never once looked in my direction after that initial greeting at the door. I might as well have been part of the furniture. You know that feeling when you're in a crowded room but you're completely alone? When you realize you could leave and nobody would notice for hours? That's how I felt standing in my own son's house at his birthday party, surrounded by 60 people who didn't know I existed. I found myself by the dessert table, pretending to be very interested in the selection of fancy cupcakes, when I overheard John's business partner, Tom, ask him about his mother. "Your mom seems sweet," Tom said. "Does she live nearby?" I was right there, maybe 8 feet away, partially hidden by one of those ridiculous balloon arrangements. I could see John's face clearly. He glanced in my direction. I thought he saw me, but maybe he didn't. And then he said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "We keep in touch. She's getting up there in age. Jessica and I invite her to things out of obligation more than anything. She doesn't really fit into our lifestyle anymore." Tom made some neutral sound, clearly uncomfortable, but John kept going. And that's when Jessica joined them, champagne glass in hand, and added her piece. "Honestly, John is too nice. I keep telling him we don't owe her constant inclusion. She made her choices in life, and we've made ours. Different generations, different values. She doesn't matter to our social circle. It's just duty at this point." She doesn't matter. Those 3 words rang in my ears like a gunshot. I stood there, frozen, holding that untouched glass of champagne, and felt something inside me break. Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe something inside me finally snapped into place after years of bending. I looked around the party with new eyes. All these people John and Jessica thought were important. Their friends, their colleagues, their social circle. People who probably didn't know I existed until tonight, if they noticed me at all. This was their world, and I was right. I didn't fit into it. But not because I wasn't good enough. Because I'd built something real. I'd worked real jobs, sacrificed real years, loved a real man, and raised real children. While they were busy curating their perfect Instagram-worthy life, I'd lived an actual one. And in that moment, I decided I was done apologizing for it. Let me tell you about the life I lived before this moment, so you understand why those words cut so deep. I met my husband Frank when I was 19 years old. He was 22, fresh out of college, about to start his first job as an engineer. We got married 6 months later. That's how things were. Done back then. We were young and in love and stupid with dreams. Frank wanted to start his own firm. He had the brains, the ambition, the vision, but no money. His parents had disowned him for marrying me. I came from the wrong side of town, you see. My father was a construction worker. My mother cleaned houses. Not good enough for their son. So I worked. Oh, honey, did I work. I waitressed double shifts while Frank got his business off the ground. I worked at a diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then I'd go home, take care of baby John, and head out again for the evening shift at a different restaurant, 5 to midnight. Frank's mother, the one who thought I wasn't good enough, she'd watch John those evening hours, but she made sure I knew it was a burden. I did that for 3 years. 3 years of barely sleeping, of missing my baby's first steps because I was pouring coffee for truckers, of coming home to find John already asleep and Frank buried in paperwork at the kitchen table. But the firm grew. Frank got his first big contract, then another, then another. By the time David was born, we were comfortable. By the time John was in middle school, we were wealthy. And I never forgot what it took to get there. Never forgot those years of sacrifice. Frank died 8 years ago. Heart attack, sudden and brutal. 1 minute, he was trimming the hedge in our backyard. The next minute, he was gone. John was 37. David was 34. Both of them established in their own careers, both married, both living in nice houses, in nice neighborhoods. We buried Frank on a Tuesday. By Friday, John was asking about the estate. "Not because I need the money, Mom," he'd said, sitting in my living room with a folder full of documents. "Just so we can get everything organized, make sure everything's properly allocated." Allocated. Like his father's life's work was something to be distributed like party favors. The estate was complicated. Frank had built something substantial. The engineering firm had been sold to a larger corporation 3 years before he died, and he'd invested wisely. There was property. There were accounts. There were assets in multiple states. And legally, I inherited everything. Frank had been very clear in his will. Everything went to me, with the understanding that I would distribute to our sons as I saw fit. John had been very focused on that "as I saw fit" part. "You don't need all this, Mom," he'd said more than once over the years. "You're living in a 3-bedroom house by yourself. You could downsize and we could help you invest the proceeds." Help me invest. What he meant was, give us control. But I'd been smart. Smarter than they gave me credit for. I'd kept excellent records. I knew exactly what I had, where it was, and how it was titled. I'd made sure my name was on everything. The house in Mesa, the rental properties, in Phoenix and Tucson, the commercial building Frank had bought as an investment in 2010, the stock portfolios, the retirement accounts that I'd rolled over after his death, all in my name, Eleanor Patricia Morrison. And over the past 8 years, I'd been generous. I'd helped with down payments. I'd contributed to the grandkids' college funds. I'd given Christmas checks and birthday checks and just because checks. I'd estimated I'd given my sons close to $400,000 between them since Frank died. Let me be specific about that because the details matter. When John wanted to upgrade to the house in Scottsdale, I gave him $80,000 for the down payment. When David's wife needed surgery that their insurance wouldn't fully cover, I paid the $42,000 bill. When Zoe went to college, I contributed $50,000 to her tuition across 4 years. When John wanted to expand his consulting business, I gave him a $75,000 loan that we both knew he'd never repay. Every time, they said thank you. Every time it felt like they were checking off a box. Thanks, Mom. And then months would go by before I'd hear from them again, unless they needed something else. I never held it over their heads, never once said, "Remember when I gave you—" I gave because I thought that's what mothers do. I gave because I had it, and they were my sons. And isn't that what family is supposed to be about? $400,000, and apparently, I didn't matter. If you're enjoying this story and you can relate to family taking you for granted, please hit that subscribe button below. Your support means the world to me, and I have so many more stories to share with you. Standing there at that party, listening to my son and daughter-in-law discuss me like I was an obligation, a burden, someone who didn't fit into their lifestyle, I felt something click into place in my mind. I'd spent my entire life making myself smaller so other people could be bigger. I'd worked myself to exhaustion so Frank could build his dream. I'd given and given and given to my sons, asking for nothing in return except maybe some basic respect and love. And this was what I got. Obligation. She doesn't matter. I set down my champagne glass on the nearest table. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't make a scene. I didn't interrupt John and his casual cruelty. I simply walked through the crowd, out the front door, got in my car, and drove home. The entire drive, I was calm, eerily calm. My hands weren't shaking. My vision was clear. I knew exactly what I needed to do. When I got home, I didn't even turn on the lights. I sat in my dark living room for about 10 minutes, just breathing, just thinking. Then I got up, went to my office, and opened my safe. Inside was everything. Every deed, every account statement, every investment document. I'd kept it all organized, color-coded even. Frank used to tease me about my organizational system, but now I was grateful for it. I also pulled out a business card I'd been holding onto for about 2 years. Patricia Chen, estate planning attorney. She'd done some work for my friend Dorothy, and Dorothy had raved about her. "She's sharp as a tack," Dorothy had said, "and she works fast when you need her to." It was 9:30 on a Saturday night, but the card had a cell phone number. I called it. Patricia answered on the third ring. "This is Patricia Chen." "Ms. Chen, my name is Eleanor Morrison. I'm a friend of Dorothy Haberman's. I need to restructure my entire estate, and I need it done immediately. Are you available to meet tomorrow?" There was a pause. Then, "Define immediately." "I need documents drafted, signed, and filed by Monday morning. I'll pay whatever premium rate you require for emergency service." Another pause. I could almost hear her brain working. "Mrs. Morrison, that's a very tight timeline. Can you tell me what this is regarding?" "I'm 72 years old, I'm of completely sound mind, and I need to legally transfer certain assets out of my name before my family realizes I'm doing it. Everything is in my name alone. I'm not married. No one has power of attorney over me. This is entirely my decision, and I need it executed quickly." "I see." Her voice was different now. Focused, professional. "Can you come to my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow? Bring all your documents." "I'll be there." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious or having second thoughts. I didn't sleep because I was busy. I went through every single document in my safe. I made lists. I calculated values. I drafted notes about what I wanted to do. I also did something else. I wrote down every instance over the past 8 years where my sons had made me feel small. Not because I wanted to wallow in it, but because I needed to be clear with myself that this wasn't about one comment at one party. It was the time John told me I was too old to understand how modern business works when I offered advice based on 40 years of watching Frank build his company. It was the time Jessica rolled her eyes when I suggested a family dinner at my house because my cooking was too heavy for their lifestyle. It was the time David forgot my birthday entirely, and when I mentioned it 2 weeks later, he said, "Oh, Mom, you know how busy I am." It was the years of shortened phone calls, the holidays where they'd arrive late and leave early, the times they'd make plans without including me and then act surprised when I found out, the subtle and not so subtle messages that I was inconvenient, outdated, not quite up to their standards. One comment at a party? No. This was years of death by 1,000 cuts, and I'd been too afraid to admit it to myself because they were my children. And aren't you supposed to love your children unconditionally? But they were adults now, and unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional access to my assets. By the time the sun came up Sunday morning, I had a complete inventory of everything I owned. The house in Mesa, valued at approximately $420,000. The rental duplex in Phoenix, valued at $560,000. The small apartment building in Tucson, 4 units, valued at $730,000. The commercial property, a small strip mall Frank had bought years ago, valued at $1.2 million. My investment accounts, stocks, and bonds total value approximately $900,000. My retirement accounts total value approximately $450,000. My savings and checking accounts about $75,000. My car, paid off, worth maybe $12,000. Total, roughly $4,347,000. $4 million that my son thought didn't matter. $4 million built on my sweat and my sacrifice and my husband's dreams. I met Patricia at her office at 8 a.m. sharp. She was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with short gray hair and sharp eyes behind stylish glasses. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "show me what we're working with." I laid it all out for her. Everything. And then I told her what I wanted to do. I want everything transferred out of my name. I want it done legally, properly, in a way that cannot be contested. I don't want to give it to my sons. I want it set up so they cannot touch it, cannot claim it, cannot argue about it. Patricia listened, made notes, asked pointed questions. "Where do you want the assets to go?" I'd thought about this all night. I want to establish a charitable trust. I want the trust to own everything. I want the rental income to fund my living expenses for the rest of my life. And upon my death, I want everything liquidated and donated to causes I designate. Women's shelters, organizations that help elderly people who've been financially abused by family members, scholarship funds for non-traditional students, people who had to work their way through school. Patricia looked up at me. "Your sons are going to be unhappy about this." "My sons think I don't matter. I'm simply agreeing with them." Something flickered in Patricia's eyes, maybe recognition, maybe respect. "Okay, this is doable, but we need to move fast. If there's any indication you're doing this under duress or without capacity." I'm doing this with complete mental clarity because I finally see my family for who they really are. Can you get this done by tomorrow? If you can stay here all day today and work with me and my paralegal, yes, it's going to cost you about $15,000 in fees for the emergency service. That's fine. Patricia called in her paralegal, a young man named Derek who couldn't have been more than 30. He set up his laptop while Patricia explained what we were doing. "We're creating an irrevocable charitable remainder trust," Patricia explained. "This means once it's established and funded, you cannot undo it. You'll retain income rights for life, but the assets themselves will be owned by the trust. Upon your death, everything goes to the charities you designate. Your sons will have no legal claim." "What if they argue I wasn't mentally competent when I set this up?" I asked. "That's why we're being so thorough today," Patricia said. Derek is going to document everything. We'll have you evaluated by a neutral party if needed. We'll record conversations showing your clear understanding of what you're doing and why. We'll make sure there's no possible argument that you were confused or coerced. We worked all day Sunday. Patricia was brilliant. She drafted documents, explained every single clause, made sure I understood what I was doing. She had me read sections out loud, explain back to her what they meant, initial pages showing I'd reviewed and approved each section. Around noon, she brought in a notary and a witness, another attorney from a different firm who specialized in estate law. He spent 30 minutes talking with me privately, asking me questions about my decision, making sure I understood the implications. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "once this trust is funded and the paperwork is filed, this is permanent. Your children will inherit nothing from you. Do you understand that?" "I understand it perfectly," I said. "My children have made it clear they view me as an obligation. I'm releasing them from that obligation." He made notes, signed a document attesting to my mental competency, and left. By 6 p.m., we had a complete estate plan. The Eleanor Morrison Charitable Trust would own everything. I would be the trustee during my lifetime, controlling all the assets, receiving all the income. Upon my death or incapacitation, a professional trustee would take over, liquidate everything, and distribute the proceeds according to my wishes. My sons would get nothing, not because I was being vindictive, but because they'd made it clear I didn't matter. "We'll file everything first thing Monday morning," Patricia said. "Once it's filed and recorded, it's done. You'll have legal protection and your wishes will be ironclad." "Thank you," I said. "You have no idea what this means to me." She smiled, a real smile. "Actually, I think I do. I had a client last year in a similar situation. Her daughter had been stealing from her for years. Sometimes the hardest thing we do is protect ourselves from the people we love." I went home that night and slept like a baby, the best sleep I'd had in years. Monday morning, Patricia called me at 9 a.m. "It's done. Everything's filed and recorded. The trust is official and all the property transfers are logged with the county. You're protected." "How long until they can see the public records?" "The property transfers will show up in the county database immediately. Anyone who knows how to search property records can see that Eleanor Morrison no longer owns those properties. The trust does." Perfect. I knew John. I knew he periodically checked property records online. He'd told me once he liked to keep track of real estate values in the family. Call it morbid curiosity, call it greed, call it whatever you want. He checked. And sure enough, by Tuesday morning, my phone started ringing. First call, John. I let it go to voicemail. Second call, John again. Voicemail. Third call, Jessica. Voicemail. Fourth call, David, calling from California. Voicemail. Text messages started flooding in. John. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Call me immediately." Jessica. "Eleanor, John is very upset. Whatever you've done, we need to discuss this like adults." David. "Mom, John called me freaking out. What's going on? Please call me back." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my back porch, and watched the hummingbirds at my feeder. By Tuesday afternoon, John showed up at my house. I watched through the window as he pounded on my door. I didn't answer. He knew I was home. My car was in the driveway. He stood there for 10 minutes, knocking, calling my name, finally yelling, "Mom, I know you're in there. We need to talk about what you've done." What I'd done, as if I'd committed some crime by legally managing my own assets. I stood in my hallway just on the other side of that door and listened to him rage. Part of me, the mother part, the part that had rocked him to sleep as a baby, that had stayed up all night when he had the flu, that had cheered at every soccer game and graduation. That part wanted to open the door, wanted to explain, wanted him to understand. But I didn't, because that mother part had been doing all the work for 45 years, and it was tired. Eventually, he left. The phone calls and texts continued. By Wednesday, the messages were getting angrier. John, you can't just transfer everything away from the family. Dad would be ashamed of you. That one almost made me laugh. Frank would have been proud of me. Frank, who'd watched me work myself to the bone so he could build his dream. Frank, who'd made sure everything went to me because he trusted my judgment. Jessica sent a particularly nasty text that night. You're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her children succeed without you. This is elder abuse in reverse. Elder abuse in reverse. I had to read that 3 times to make sure I understood what she was saying. According to Jessica, me protecting my own assets from people who called me an obligation was somehow abuse. David kept trying a different approach. He'd call and leave long, rambling voicemails about how much he loved me, how John didn't speak for him, how we could work this out as a family, but then he'd always end with something like, I just think you're making a decision you'll regret, or we should at least talk to a mediator about this. Not once did he say, Mom, I'm sorry you felt invisible at that party. Not once did he say, what John said was wrong, and I should have defended you years ago. It was always about the money, dressed up in concerns about my mental state or our family unity. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after the birthday party, I finally responded. I sent one text message to both my sons. Boys, I overheard what you said about me at the party, that I don't matter, that you include me only out of obligation. I've decided to make things easier for you. You no longer have any obligation to me. All my assets are legally secured in a charitable trust. Upon my death, everything goes to charity. I wish you both well in your lives. Please don't contact me again unless you're interested in having a real relationship based on love and respect, not expectations of inheritance. The response was immediate and explosive. John called 23 times in 1 hour. I blocked his number. David called crying, apologizing, saying he'd had no idea John felt that way, that he loved me. But he also asked if I was being rash and if maybe we could talk this through with a mediator. I didn't respond. Jessica sent me a long text calling me selfish, saying I was punishing John for one comment, that I was destroying the family. I blocked her number too. Then came the lawyer letter. John actually hired an attorney to send me a letter threatening to challenge my competency, to argue that I'd been unduly influenced, that the asset transfer was invalid. I called Patricia immediately. She laughed. Let them try, she said. You're clearly competent. We have documentation of your decision-making process. You weren't under duress. You sought me out. We have witnesses to your mental state. We followed every legal protocol. Tell them if they want to waste their money on a lawyer, that's their choice, but they won't win. I forwarded Patricia's response to John's lawyer. That was the last I heard from their attorney. What I didn't expect was Zoe. My granddaughter showed up at my house 3 weeks after everything happened. She knocked softly, and when I looked through the window, she was alone. No John, no Jessica. I opened the door. Grandma, she said, and her eyes were red like she'd been crying. Please, can we talk? I let her in. We sat in my living room and she told me everything. How she'd heard about what happened, how John and Jessica had been talking about it non-stop, how they were furious with me, how they kept saying I was being vindictive and unreasonable. But, Grandma, Zoe said, looking right at me, I was at that party. I heard what Dad said about you. I heard Aunt Jessica. I was standing right there and I didn't say anything, and I'm so sorry. I should have defended you. I should have said something. She started crying. You've always been so good to me. You helped pay for my college. You sent me care packages. You remembered every birthday. And I stood there and let them talk about you like you were nothing. I reached over and took her hand. Zoe, you're 23 years old. It's not your job to fix your father's character. But it's not right, she said. What they said isn't true. You matter. You matter so much. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. Do you want to know what they're saying now? Mom told me I shouldn't come here, that you're not well, and that I might upset you. Dad keeps talking about how you've changed and how you're making decisions you don't understand. They're painting you as this confused old woman who got taken advantage of by a lawyer." "I'm not confused," I said quietly. "I'm probably thinking more clearly than I have in years." "I know," Zoe said. "That's why I had to come. Because they're rewriting history, Grandma. They're acting like you were always difficult, like this came out of nowhere. But I remember you driving 2 hours to bring me soup when I was sick in my dorm. I remember you staying up with me the night before my thesis defense, helping me practice my presentation. I remember you being there for every important moment of my life, and I can't remember the last time Dad came to visit you without wanting something." She pulled out her phone and showed me a text from Jessica. "Look at this. Mom sent this yesterday." The text read, "Your grandmother is being selfish and manipulative. She's punishing your father for being successful. Don't let her guilt you into taking her side. This is between adults." Zoe looked at me with fierce eyes. "You're not being selfish. You're not manipulating anyone." And what happened at that party wasn't about Dad being successful. It was about basic human decency, and he failed. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her life, her job, her boyfriend, her dreams, things she never shared when her parents were around. And I realized this girl, this young woman, she was the only one who'd come to me without an agenda. Not to convince me to change the trust, not to get access to money, just to apologize and connect. "Zoe," I said before she left, "I want you to know something. The trust has provisions for educational grants. If you ever want to go back to school, get a graduate degree, there's money available through the trust for that. Not because you came here today, but because I've always believed in investing in people who are trying to better themselves." She hugged me and cried some more. After she left, I sat in my quiet house and realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was free. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel obligated to anyone. I didn't have to worry about managing an inheritance for sons who saw me as a bank account. I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into their lifestyle. I started living for me.